I'm sure you already know what an MMO is, a massively multiplayer online game, usually followed with an RPG at the end. It's an old genre and one of the hardest to manage, requiring consistent dev support to stay alive, which of course requires consistent monetization. After all, people need to be paid for the work they do, and keeping an online game alive with substantial updates requires a lot of work. Monetizing games has become standardized now, but during the life cycle of a lot of earlier MMOs, there wasn't a clear-cut way to handle it. This of course has led to a huge majority of them, regardless of their popularity, to get shut down by the developers. Let's take a look at a few that I found interesting, starting off with the Matrix Online. Of course, what other major IP wouldn't benefit from an MMO? A series where the entire concept is focused on being in a virtual world? It's a no-brainer, and fans at the time agreed. After all, when watching The Matrix, who didn't wish that they were Neo, allowed to choose to take the red pill and take control of the virtual world everyone was living in? When you first load in, you get a cool little mini cinematic of someone watching from inside a security camera looking for their new red pill, which is where you get to select your search criteria. The game is using the character creator as an in-story means of identifying the player, as if you creating your character is actually someone explaining who your character is to someone else, if that makes any sense. Your search criteria is just your base attributes. There's a few interesting options like troubled intellectual and detached spectator. I, of course, went with the fanatic self-improver. You trained your mind and body into top condition. No pain, no gain. You hit the limits of physical perfection in the Matrix and went beyond that limit. This option buffing your vitality at the cost of your belief. Honestly, I just picked it because I liked the name. After that, you get to actually make your character. I was blessed with the Duma as a preset, so I of course ran with him. The character creator is okay. It has decent variety and the default clothes options are definitely very matrixy, though I'm not sure why they locked different eye colors to these weird facial detail options. You can get some cool colors here, but at the cost of having super obnoxious face paint. More power to you if that's your thing, but I can't say it's for me. After you've put yourself together, you can create your handle, which I'm assuming is for other players to use to identify you, and your blue pill normie name. Let me introduce you to Big Jeff, name Jeff Joey. He's a big fella. There's a cool detail here where you can see your character now on the security camera from before. There's obviously been a lot of effort put into the experience of the MMO to immerse you in the world. With our character created, we're now ready to jack into the Matrix. Okay, here's where I have to be honest with you. The Matrix Online shut down back in 2009, which probably makes you wonder how I'm even playing it right now. That's because I'm using a fan-made and managed emulator, one that's currently only being worked on by a single guy. This means that a lot of actual features that would have been available during the game's lifecycle are missing, including combat and missions. Currently, the emulator is just a means to explore the game's environments, see what the world had to offer, which is still really cool, and we'll use it to have a look around the game in just a bit, but it means I can't show you how the game was exactly. Instead, we have to look back on what other people have said when talking about the game. First of all, there were a few introductory cutscenes that explained the beginning of the story the game had to offer. This was a story MMO, meaning it progressed real time, and players had to participate in timed missions and live events to unlock the full story. It was ahead of its time, that's for sure. The most interesting thing about the story is that it's the canon continuation of the series. It takes place directly after Matrix Reloaded, and, spoilers for The Matrix, is where the story of how Morpheus dies is told, which is ambitious for a game tie-in. Not many would go full throttle and allow a limited time supplementary media to contain canon story beats of your blockbuster franchise. If you're interested in the story, you can actually watch all the cutscenes in order on this emulator before you jack in, or you can watch a re-upload on YouTube if you want. The saddest part is seeing the game's slowly fading budget as the cutscenes turn from being fully animated with the in-game models to simple black and white slideshows with no voice acting. Getting back to the game, you'd also play through some beginner missions. What these were exactly is hard to say, but apparently missions followed a pretty standard formula. You'd use your cell phone to speak to a contact who'd give you an objective of either finding someone or some code at a specific location. You'd go travel there, fight off whatever enemies that were present, collect what was needed, and report back to your contact through phone booths located around the map. If that sounds repetitive, then yeah, I'd agree. The mission variety is a big complaint from old reviews at the time. Once the tutorial was completed, you'd pick your organization, either Zion, Machines, or Merovingian. There's not much on how the gameplay would be affected by your organization choice, but I can only imagine it would change the direction of the missions you did and how you'd be able to engage with the evolving story. I didn't mention it before, but one of the coolest features of the game was that you could interact with the main characters in the story and they would talk to you in real time. A staff member who worked on the game would appear as certain characters and interact with clans, answering questions or inquiries about the story. You could quite literally encounter Morpheus while playing and talk to him in real time, and he'd give clues and exposition on what would happen next in the story to you. This level of interactiveness is unheard of nowadays. I can't think of any other game that's gone as far as having actual people roleplay as the main NPCs to provide context for their players. Now saying that, I get why a lot of companies wouldn't do that. Having someone employed as a full-time role player just to increase the immersion for a handful of the player base isn't the best financial decision, but that doesn't stop me from thinking it's really cool, that's for sure. Alright, we've looked at the story, let's take a gander at the combat system. After all, the epic fight is what a lot of people love about the Matrix. Surely they nailed it in this MMO. Well, to start off, you had the choice of 3 separate base classes to pick from: the Coder, the Hacker, and the Operative. The Coder could make new abilities for you to unlock yourself, as opposed to having to purchase them. They could also create simulacrums to fight for them. Think like a Summoner or Necromancer. The Hacker could manipulate the code to use long-range attacks, like buffing allies or debuffing enemies, like a mage almost, but code instead of magic. And the Operative was your standard fighter class. You could learn martial arts, gain skill with different guns, your common soldier, and probably the one most people opted to go into, seeing as it was the closest to allowing you to have Matrix-style combat. Each class had subclasses that you could branch into, like the Spy class for the Operative, allowing you to focus more on stealth attacks, letting you use throwing knives, that kind of thing. There were apparently 21 subclasses you could build into, and the game was set up in a way so that you could easily swap what class you were playing, as to not lock anyone into a specific playstyle. Speaking of playstyle, the game had 2 different modes of combat. Now, quickly, I will say the descriptions provided for how these worked is lacking. There's not any detailed explanation of combat anywhere I could find. That made sense to me at least. So I wouldn't be surprised if I'm way off on how this worked. Just a disclaimer, in case any old heads who played the Matrix Online back in the day stumble upon this video and are aghast at my horrible explanation. I've tried my best with what I'm able to deduce. We have Free Fire, which was predominantly for range combat, allowing you to change who you're focused to on the fly, mainly when combating large groups of enemies or when you're involved in a larger scale of battle. I could imagine a hacker staying in this combat mode most of the time, so that they could heal teammates and debuff enemies without being locked onto a specific target. And then you had Interlock or Close Combat. This one forcing 2 people into a 1v1 scenario. They'd be played in rounds of 4 seconds. Each combatant would use different sets of abilities during the round that had their own resistances and accuracy, and whoever won the exchange would do damage or defend against damage based on how their stats stacked against each other. There was a level of randomness added as well. The game would affect your stats with a luck roll to, I suppose, stop any stalemates if 2 people were similar in level. During a round, there could be 3 different outcomes. One being a hit-hit, where one player hits the other, however the other player is able to get off a counter-attack. The hit-miss, where one player will damage the other while they're blocking or dodging. Or the miss-miss, which is where both players parry each other, doing no damage. And again, damage dealt was dictated on each player's defensive or offensive stats. If that sounds confusing, then yeah, it was to me as well. But I'm assuming it played out in a simpler way when actually playing the game. A big issue this game faced was that the combat was repetitive, a complaint you'll be hearing about a lot of things the game has to offer, and doesn't match the expectation a Matrix game would have. The fights in the Matrix are one of its highlights. High-octane fights with quick combat, larger-than-life attacks, that sort of thing. That's not what's conveyed in this game though. They tried, but the click-based combat of an MMO doesn't translate well to what the Matrix should be. No matter how flashy you make the moves look, it doesn't stop the game from feeling like a click spam contest, which is far from the experience someone would want from the Matrix. And I don't know if you're seeing what I'm seeing, but the menus look obnoxiously busy with the amounts of abilities covering the screen, and that would also dampen the experience. I'm sure for those who liked it for what it was fun. But if you were coming to the game for an immersive Matrix experience, you weren't really getting it when it came to the combat. So, with what I can't experience out of the way, let's take a look at what I can. First of all, I really enjoy the loading animation the game does every time you jack in or go to a new location. All the textures being replaced by the Matrix code looks super cool. I was also really surprised with how good the game looked for being from 2004. The textures are decently crisp and the models are actually nicely detailed. The render distance is far enough where you're able to get lost in the cityscape and not feel as if you're running around a game environment. There's NPCs walking the streets and cars driving around, again helping the world feel real. You can talk to the NPCs, but they just spout nonsense.
Whoa, deja vu.
Now, because there's no missions or combat, you'll find lots of random groups of NPCs just standing around that won't do anything when you approach them. I can only assume these guys are related to specific missions or events. I try to get some sort of interaction out of them, but the best you can do is read up on their in-game description. One of the most impressive things about the map is that it's not only huge, but every building can be entered and explored, and there's no loading screen required to do it. You can just walk in and look around. That's including the huge skyscrapers you see. You can take elevators all the way up to the roof and jump right back down. And when you're inside the building, you can look out the window and see, in real time, the ground below. That being said, the floors of each building are lackluster, generally just the same room repeated ad nauseum until you reach the roof. Now, I'll give it the benefit of the doubt because I'm very sure a lot of these buildings were used for missions and would have had enemies to fight instead of just being empty, so the average player wouldn't notice the repetition too much. After I had enough of the starting location, I decided to use the hard lines to teleport around and see the rest of the map. I chose the very first option from the drop-down, Bathari Row in Westview, which was a good choice because I immediately came face to face with this cool huge code monster guy, the Wasteland Corruptor. I can only guess that this was some mid to late level boss that posed quite the threat to players at the time. I did try and see if I could get him to do something, but alas, I couldn't. All I was able to do was be in awe of his presence. The scenery change around the guy was nice. Well, not nice in the looks aesthetically pleasing sense, more nice as in different than skyscrapers and not poorly made. It looked like some sort of abandoned warehouse or something, and there were these corrupted guys standing around everywhere. How all these guys tied to the Wasteland Corruptor is anyone's guess, but I'm sure it was a fun experience for those who got to have it. I found my first mini quest giver, Ethan, the Collector. He wanted me to get 16 blood drinker teeth and my reward would be the mother coat. Sadly, no matter how much I wanted the alluring coat, I had no way of getting the teeth, so I had to walk away from Ethan in shame. I was shocked to find straight up zombies just roaming the streets. Maybe my Matrix lore needs to be brushed up, but I don't remember zombies being a staple. Of course, they didn't do anything, and it was funny seeing cars just casually ignoring these grotesque fellas. The dead eyes of this gruesomely revived blue pill look at you hungrily. I like how often the game uses the term blue pill derogatorily. I get why they do it, but it's funny to look back on with the modern day culture surrounding the term. Looking around further, I found some vampires just chilling. Guess that's where I would have gotten their teeth for the mother coat. Again, I don't remember vampires being in the Matrix, but hey, creative liberties and all that. It's an MMO after all, you've got to concoct some kind of enemy variety. They are fitted up though. The starter jacket and bare chest is definitely a look. Of course, when I stumbled upon Club Succubus, I had to see what was in store for me inside. Surely, it'll be bustling with activity. The vendor at the counter I thought would try and charge me for entry or something, but no, he He was just there to sell me guns, which I bought after forgetting that I couldn't use them. I was able to just walk in, none of the NPCs care what you do. I'm sure this area was tied to some mission, and I'm just assuming there was a prerequisite to gain entry, but that's non-existent in this emulator. You can just go anywhere you'd want. Now, I wasn't expecting too much from Club Succubus, but a completely empty club with no music and at most 4 NPCs standing around was disappointing. Again, I'll give the game the benefit of the doubt and assume there's probably more that's meant to be happening here. I'll be honest, so far the game hasn't felt empty like you would think. I suppose the surplus of NPCs hanging around helped, but once I got into this quiet empty club, the feeling of isolation set in. I'm sure this area would have been filled with players at one point, all having a good time and talking to each other. To be here now when there's nothing was weird. I tried to talk to some of the NPCs to see if they had any special dialogue, but I was just told to go away by everyone. The absolute strangest thing about this place though was the background noises I could hear every once in a while that I couldn't find the origin of. One was the sound of a door closing. The other was an ominous phone ringing. In both instances, I couldn't find the origin, so I just chalked it up to random background noise, but I would be lying if I said I wasn't a little spooked. The final area I decided to explore was under the international dropdown, Shinjuku. I'll be honest, I was already getting a bit bored of running around skyscrapers, so I thought having a look at the Japanese scenery would be a good change of pace. And it was. They didn't skimp out too hard on the Japanese aesthetic. The sky was even a pleasant pink as opposed to the grey it has been. Now, don't get me wrong, there was just skyscrapers everywhere like before, but they had their own aesthetic, so it helped alleviate the feeling of monotony. I'll be honest, I don't know if this is actually meant to be Shinjuku itself, or if this is a little Tokyo situation, because one, I found an Eastern grocery, which I don't know about you, but I feel like a place in the East wouldn't advertise itself as Eastern. And two, the NPC's dialogue didn't change to reference the location. One of them complained about Cleveland to me. I suppose that's a nitpick though. The buildings all had cool themed interiors, and the area was just as sizable as every other location, so I can't act like they didn't try and commit to the aesthetic. I had fun looking around this game, but I can get where the complaints for it came from. Most people said the missions and combat were repetitive, which is the main core of any MMO, but the locations feel like that as well. I mean, there's only so much you can do with a city. Most MMOs don't have this to worry about. If they want a new location, they can add an enchanted forest or desert or something, but a game set in the Matrix doesn't have that flexibility. It's gotta be set in a city for the game to make sense. If they deviate too far, it loses a core part of its identity. Even with its declining budget, the game did a lot. It told an expansive, evolving story, had unique live events, and was around for 4 years before it eventually shut down. That's a respectable amount of time, if you ask me. I think the biggest issue was it was too ambitious for its time, trying to tell a story with a scope as large as it wanted, and also doing its hardest to keep the player base immersed. It's something games today would struggle with, and is probably why no one's attempted it quite like it since. How the developers shut down the game is the entire reason I chose to talk about it. After announcing the time the servers would be shut down, players loaded into the Matrix and would have this happen. This is hands down the coolest, most unique way a game has shut down its servers I've seen. They really tried to keep everyone immersed all the way until the end. The Matrix Online had an impact, enough of one to warrant a dedicated group of people to still want to jack in and play it, even in an incomplete state. The emulator I'm using will be linked in the description, and there's a Discord community to go along with it that is active right now, hosting meetups and parties for the surviving members to have fun in. If you like the Matrix at all, give it a look. The map is huge and you're missing out if you don't explore it. We're talking about LEGO now, LEGO Universe to be exact. Originally releasing in 2010, LEGO, like every other IP at the time, was trying to capitalize on the genre and had a crack at releasing a kid-friendly MMO. I won't yap about this one too much, we'll just get right into it. You get to make your minifig to start off. To keep things consistent, I tried to make another Doomer. Here's Big Jeff. The game also makes you set up a temporary name made up of preset options while you wait for your username to be accepted. Kids game and all. So for now, Big Jeff is Massive Sad Face Soybean until the name gets verified. We kick off on a ship called the Venture Explorer that's under attack by the Maelstrom, that being the main antagonistic force for the MMO's loose plot. We're instructed by a cool space soldier guy called Jet Moonshot to talk to the strangely normal looking Bob on what to do. This is our tutorial of all the basics, narrated to us by the Patrick Stewart for some reason.
To move around, press these keys.
There's not a whole lot to it. We collect some imagination that lets us build things. Building works in a few different ways. Generally, around maps, you'll find loose collections of Lego bricks that you can interact with. Your character will quickly put together whatever it is at the expense of some of your imagination, and you'll get some coins, etc. once you complete the build. These smaller builds will break after a few seconds once you've used them, but they can always be rebuilt as long as you have some imagination in your meter. You can also find and earn parts to build certain key items that you'll need to progress through different areas. During the tutorial, you're instructed to find pieces of a rocket ship to put together that we can then use to escape before things get too dire. After we do so, we land in Avant Gardens. That's also under attack by the Maelstrom. We've got to talk to Epsilon Starcracker from the Nexus Force on what to do next. A lot of epic names here, except for Bob. And it's here we get to experience the MMO side of the Lego game. Epsilon gives us a weapon of our choice and explains how to equip it from our inventory bag, and we're tasked with smashing 15 Stromlings. This is generally how every quest or mission plays out. You'll talk to someone that'll give you a basic objective like kill X amount of enemies or collect X amount of items dropped by enemies. You'll report back to them, then they'll give you another mission that follows a similar formula. I'll be honest, it got boring and annoying fast. Especially later on, there's areas where you have to go back and forth numerous times, and the locations, while they look nice enough, get annoying to traverse the second or third time the game makes you do it. I get why missions are like this. Most MMOs have this kind of mission setup, but the drawback that makes this game specifically such a slog is how slow you move. It takes forever to get anywhere, so having to run back and forth across numerous locations is a huge pain. I haven't mentioned it yet, so I might as well say it now. The game looks nice enough. It has that aesthetic every Lego game had, where certain key locations and interactables were made of definitive Lego bricks, while the general terrain was more realistic. I don't like that aesthetic too much myself, but it's not particularly bad or anything, and is par for the course for Lego games, so I can't act surprised. They use actual Lego bricks where it matters, and the two aesthetics blend nicely enough. One of the cool things the game's got going for it are these interactable builds. Scattered around certain groups of enemies, you'll find loose bricks that you can use your imagination to put back together, and whatever is built will help you take out whatever enemies are nearby. Some larger enemies also fall apart into bricks that you can then put together to make turrets to help you out. I guess they realized that there's some tedium in having to kill a bunch of enemies, so they added small elements like these to spice up the gameplay a bit. After proving our worth, we get to meet the Sentinel Commander Beck Strongheart at the Sentinel base camp nearby. I like the mixture of night and sci-fi aesthetic these guys have got going on, especially the guards posted up at the entrance with straight up rifles, but regular medieval helmets. Old Mate gives us some more missions to expand a bit more on how some base mechanics work, directing us to a vendor for some more armor, consumables that heal any damage our armor takes, or whatever else we could want. Eventually, we get to attempt the Survival Challenge, a game mode where you just fight waves of enemies for as long as you can. You only need to survive for a minute to prove yourself, but from what I could tell, you can go on for as long as you would like. The interesting thing about it was that it prompted me to party up with another 3 people. I can only assume that it's a game mode you could play with randoms or friends to pass the time if you didn't want to focus on missions. I have no friends, so I did it on my own. After this, we have to do more collection-based quests, talking between different NPCs. Apparently, the people here accidentally created a Spider Queen from Maelstrom-infected bricks. The devs try and mix it up a bit. One of the quests have you using the Maelstrom vacuum to suck up loose bricks that appear around the area, but honestly, it doesn't stop the experience from being tedious. We use the bricks collected to reattempt an experiment and end up making a little spider. I'll be honest, I was a bit confused as to what's going on. The game doesn't really explain why we're attempting to redo the failed experiment that happened, or if it did, I wasn't really paying attention. The experiment works, and Wisp Lee is happy about it, I suppose. We report back to Epsilon, who apparently is also happy with whatever we did, because I've now been welcomed as a member of the Nexus Force. Epic. Of course, that doesn't mean we're done. We still have to deal with that pesky Spider Queen that was created. Now that we're a part of the Force though, we can borrow some faction gear from Melody Foxtrot to help aid us in defeating it. You get 4 different options to pick from. I end up going with this cool knight setup, and we're again instructed to kill more things to look for clues. The clues being postcards that were sent by the Spider Queen. Don't ask why the Spider Queen was sending postcards, but they do reveal the location she's hiding in. The Blockyard property. Before we can get to that location, we have to talk to Rusty Steele. The game doesn't tell you why you need to talk to this guy, besides the fact that he's on the way to the location we need to go to. So, when he gives us a handful of beyond repetitive missions, all relating to this one enclosed area, it gets annoying. Destroy some machines, go back and tell the guy. Repair some stuff, go back and tell the guy. Scare off birds all over the monument, go back and tell the guy. I wouldn't even mind doing all of this if I could do it all at once, but the fact that the game makes you go back and forth so many times was very irritating. And I still don't even know why we did all this for this guy, because once we're done, he just tells us to talk to some other guy up ahead who tells us to hurry up to the Blockyard property. I feel like Rusty Steele was just taking us for a ride, getting some free labor or something. Crash Helmet tells us that the Spider Queen is responsible for creating the maelstrom fog that's surrounding everything. They tell us that Vance Bulwark has headed to it already, but hasn't come back. So they instruct us on how we can use our rocket from the start of the game to head there. Now we can fight the Spider Queen. Vance lets us pick another set of faction gear to help aid in the fight. I didn't mention it, but we had to give our set back to Melody Foxtrot after we found all the postcards. Because I went with the knight armor before, I decided to change it up and select this biker armor that gives you 2 cool guns. The Spider Queen is our first actual boss fight, and for what it is, it's pretty fun. Every other enemy we've fought so far has died in at most 2 to 3 hits, so I was surprised to see how little damage I did to the Queen in comparison. It's got different stages and attacks. It's not as simple as just pummeling it to death. It'll launch these energy balls at you, stomp on the ground, make bullets rain down from the sky. It was fun. Eventually, after you've done a chunk of damage, it runs up this small mountain and you have to fight off smaller spiders that it awakens before it comes back down. This boss gets a ranking of big thumbs up on the enjoyable enough scale. With the Spider Queen dead, the Maelstrom fog clears as well. Our reward for the feat is we get to use the Blockyard property for ourselves. This is where we get to do some actual building in the LEGO game. Some of the rewards we've received have been models for different constructions. I myself have been collecting pieces from the castle set, and here we can put them to use. You've got different parts that you can rotate and put together to create whatever construction you'd like. From my understanding, there's a lot of different themes and pieces you can find exploring around. Of course, I didn't have much to work with, so I put together a shoddy wall, but you get the point of what you can do. I'm sure once you've put ample time into the game and gotten your hands on a larger variety of models, what you can pull off expands greatly. From my understanding, you could join other people's properties and explore their builds as well, which is cool and is the closest thing to building with actual LEGO pieces that the game offers. You are limited because you don't get to make the models, but I don't think that's the end of the world. A game that lets you build LEGO sets with every piece imaginable can't even be done today. LEGO Fortnite has a system just like this one, and that only came out a year ago. With the Spider Queen dead and the Maelstrom pushed back, Avant Gardens is saved. We talk to Sky Lane, who congratulates us on our efforts, giving us an epic tan Aussie hat as a reward, and wants us to talk to Nexus J so that we can become a true member of the Nexus Force and join a faction. From here, we can leave Avant Gardens and fly off to the Nexus Station. The Nexus Station works as the hub world for the MMO, allowing you to traverse all the different worlds the game has to offer. Getting here marks the end of the tutorial part of the game, and what was the free section. I say free because you had to still buy the base game. You just couldn't play past Avant Gardens unless you also paid for a membership, which is why Avant Gardens has so much to do in it. They wanted to push people to pay for memberships after all, so why not give them a little taste of everything the game had to offer? There's actually quite a lot to do in Avant Gardens alone besides the main story. There's other NPCs you can talk to and do quests for, collectibles to find, that sort of thing. I can see a kid being able to put a good chunk of hours here alone before they progress to the Nexus station. Which is, I guess, okay if they couldn't afford a membership. At least they still had something to do. There's a couple things we have to do here before we really get left to our own devices, and that's prove ourselves to members of the other factions. We talk to Mardolf the Orange, who gets us to build a new rocket with a special part, which is apparently enough for his approval. Then we have to talk to Johnny Thunder, who gets us to look around the station for some treasure chests. After doing that, we finally get to join a faction of our own. We've got 4 options: the Sentinels, Paradox, Assembly, and Venture League. Each faction has 3 different specialties with their own ranks and gear. When picking, you want to be really sure of your choice because you can't change it afterwards, and the faction you decide on will dictate your playstyle. Picking the Sentinels gives you the options of specializing as a Knight, Samurai, or Space Ranger. Paradox lets you be a Space Marauder, Sorcerer, or Shinobi. Assembly allows you to be an Engineer, Summoner, or Inventor. And finally, the Venture League lets you play as a Daredevil, Buccaneer, or Adventurer. Each faction and faction specialty is seemingly inspired by existing LEGO themes, which is really cool. Each specialty gives you a set of armor and weapons unique to it. I won't go into detail on what every single specialty does, but they can be grouped into specific focuses. The Sentinels specialties are strength and combat based. The Paradox specialties are more suited for group engagements with ranged, widespread attacks. The Assembly specialties are focused more on support, with an increased imagination, allowing them to build or summon things to aid in combat. And the Venture League specialties seems to be a mix of support role and aggro role, having abilities to take down enemies fast and evade combat to assist allies. I've generalized a lot, and there's definitely variety in the specialties that doesn't fit the descriptions I've given them exactly. I mainly wanted to give you an idea on what to expect. As you level up and do more missions, you can rank up your specialty and unlock new armor and weapons. There's not really an ability tree or anything like that, no specific leveling certain things. The game's more broad to be easier to understand. You pick a specialty to dictate a playstyle, you play how you'd like and level that up. I love how all the final ranked armor and weapons look for all the specialties. Seeing endgame gear in MMOs is one of my favorite aspects. I love how over the top some developers go, and something about this game's direction really hits all the right buttons. Probably the saddest thing about it is that I don't think any of the pieces for the sets are real at all. You've got all these cool designs limited to a now defunct game. I'd like to own some of these minifigs if I could, but I don't think LEGO would ever go back to these designs and release them. While we're on the topic of playstyles and abilities, let's talk about the combat because I haven't really yet. Now, I didn't get much experience with the combat past Avant Gardens, so I'll say that there's a chance things work a bit differently, depending on how far into a specialty you are and what weapons you can use. But I did find the combat being okay, if a bit boring to engage with. I think it's pretty standard for LEGO games, being fair. I'll release some hidden lore about myself that might make some of you hate me, but I didn't really play any of the LEGO games back in the day. I wasn't the biggest fan of the mixed aesthetic, and all of them were IP based, which I didn't care for, so I wasn't interested in playing them when I was younger. Sorry if you hate me, I understand. So, from my limited knowledge of other LEGO games, this one does appear to play in a similar fashion. While it's passable and I enjoy building things on the side to help kill off enemies, I found myself getting annoyed using any weapon besides a sword. I think the game could have used a lock-on system or something. Sometimes it feels like I should be hitting an enemy, but I miss, or I'm not 100% on the range I meant to have. During the Spider Queen fight when I was using the dual pistols, I had to be right in front of her to do damage even though I assumed it was a ranged weapon. And if it was a ranged weapon and I was just missing, I couldn't tell because something about the animations was off looking. That could just be a me issue, and I'm sure if you enjoy how normal LEGO games play, you'll have a blast with this one. It just wasn't for me. After picking our faction, we're free to do whatever we want. And there is a lot, so I can't show it all obviously, but I will cover the basics. Instead of one big map, there's multiple worlds you can travel to, as I'm sure you've probably figured out. There's the gnarled forest, which was based on LEGO's pirate theme. It's got a bit of a jungle vibe going for it, filled with, of course, pirates and ninjas. The Pet Cove, a smaller world made specifically to introduce pets to players. You probably saw dogs and other weird creatures walking around while I've been playing, and if you had visited this island, you could come back and tame those pets. Each pet has its own ability, and there's a bunch of them to tame. Just another layer of collectivity and player engagement. The Forbidden Valley, based off the ninja theme, not Ninjago, but we will get to that, don't worry. This one being more rocky and scenic, with dragons to fight and enchanted looking forests to explore. Frostburg, a seasonal world visitable during winter, obviously very Christmassy themed with matching unlockables to find. I believe this was only playable once because the game shut down before the next winter. Crux Prime, which is a quest-specific world tied to the story about the Maelstrom and the Nexus Force, with the Nexus Tower situated atop it, the tower also being tied to the game's story and being used as a way to explore further worlds if the game was to continue development. There were tons of worlds planned to be released and even almost finished, but couldn't come to fruition because the game was shut down before they could. The idea was for worlds to correlate with existing LEGO themes, which is really cool. I'm sure if the game continued to get support, we would have eventually have possibly seen a Star Wars tie-in world, probably something tied to the LEGO movie. The ambitions were high based on the information I could find. The only world that did release that matched an existing theme was the Ninjago Monastery. The world itself is one of the nicest, if you ask me. There was a lot of effort put into it. Ninjago was around its peak at the time, so I can see why they went as hard as they did. From my understanding, you could do missions themed around the sets and story, talk to characters from the show, and they'd give you missions, that kind of thing. Each world also had its own set of properties to unlock for you to build on, as well as earnable models to create different structures, so the variety was there if building stuff was your vibe. The game eventually shut down during January of 2012, lasting a full 2 years, not including its beta and alpha stage. There was no cool shutdown event or anything like the Matrix had, the servers were just turned off. Apparently the game just wasn't generating enough revenue to be viable to continue support, which is a fate most MMOs face. It is a shame. I feel like the game could have lasted for ages if the suits gave it more time to pick up. MMOs are slow burners. It takes a while for them to start paying the big bucks, so if LEGO just waited another year or so, I'm sure they would have seen an increased profit. Add tie-in LEGO sets around the factions and story, and I'm sure they would have had a gold mine on their hands. But hey, what do I know? I'm not an executive or anything, so maybe the game would have been a money sink no matter what. Thankfully, there's a community of dedicated fans focused on keeping the game alive. While I can't give you the exact way I was able to play it, there is the LEGO Universe Community Hub Discord that has a bunch of information on how you can create your own server and play the game itself. Keep in mind, you do need to own a copy of the game. Unlike the Matrix MMO, LEGO is still pretty serious about their copyright around the game, so there's no simple emulation or anything like that. So if you are interested in playing the MMO, assuming you have a copy of the game, I'll have the Discord link below so you guys can get on giving it a crack, which I do recommend if you enjoy LEGO games and want something to sink your teeth in. There is a lot of content here. Ouch. I'm gonna need you to bear with me for this next one, because unlike the other games that have a wiki with extensive coverage on the story, detailed descriptions of abilities, events, that sort of thing, this next game has nothing of the sort. Hold on, editing Diazzle here. Just to clarify, Bots does have a wiki on the OkaBots site. You'll learn what that is in just a second. I was just dumb and didn't realize it existed until after the fact. In fact, if any of the games I've covered here have been largely forgotten, it's this one. I'm talking about Bots, created by the now defunct game studio Acclaim. Originally released in 2006, Bots is an MMO completely different to what you'd expect. There's no skills to level up or abilities to learn, no large-scale quests and NPCs to interact with, no traversable world to explore. While the other games have been MMORPGs, Bots is just an MMO. When you first loaded up Bots, you were greeted with the most banging OST of all time. and 2 ask to pick your bot. There's 3 to pick from, and each will dictate how you play the game. We've got Patch, Surge, and Ram. Patch is the heavy hitter choice, having a high damage output and increased defense, but slower movement speed. Surge is the most agile, being able to quickly glide across the map, however it's the weakest because of it. And Ram is the middle ground, having decent attack and movement speed, but not nearly comparable to the others. Where it does excel is its transformations attack power. I'll cover what I mean by transformations in just a bit, don't worry. I went with Surge because I like gliding around the place and because it has the potential to look the coolest. I'll show you what I mean by that shortly as well. With our bot selected, we can load in and be immediately greeted with a kinda confusing menu screen. Like I said, this game's not an MMO like the others. There's not a world to explore, not in the same way at least. Instead, you've got 3 different game modes you can play, and through those do you level up and earn money to buy upgrades for your bot. We've got Player vs Virus, the PvE game mode, and the main game mode created for the game, PvP, which is exactly what it sounds like, and Base vs Base, a 4v4 team-based PvP mode that works as the game's competitive mode, the goal being to destroy the enemy's base. I'm not going to focus on the PvP and base vs base mode because it's next to impossible for me to get a match anyway, and also because they're not the focus of the game really, at least for the most part. The PvE is the core game mode and what I'll be covering. Before I get to that, I've got to explain how I'm playing this now because it's necessary for us to proceed properly through the game. Bots was shut down in 2010 after Acclaim was bought out by Playdom, who a couple months later were bought out by Disney, who didn't see any worth in keeping the game alive. Since then, a company called Xylon Gaming brought it back, exactly how it was, which is what you're seeing now. However, around 2020, I think, support stopped. You can still play the game, the website is still active, but they're no longer performing maintenance. Then, around 2021, a new project was created called Ochre Bots to breathe new life into the game. This is what I'm going to swap to playing because it's still getting support today with an active, if small, community. The game is exactly the same in how it plays. The only difference is the UI. The main reason I'm swapping is because this version of the game is still getting updates, and it has a functioning, if simple, quest system that'll help explain how you're meant to play the game. The version created by Xylon Gaming doesn't have this feature, and without it, we're not getting the full game experience. Normally, I'd refer to a wiki to get information on how quests were played during the game's original run, but like I said, the wiki for this game is lacking, so I have to assume Ochre Bots is currently handling quests how the game did originally. So, here's the new UI. Looks good, but to be honest, I am more partial to the older layout. I will say this new UI has better readability, but it's lacking the source the older style had. As you can see, we've got a notification of active quests. If we do the command add quests, we can see what is required. Again, it's not much, it just wants us to clear the training circuit, but it's better than nothing. To complete this quest, we've got to beat the training camp and the training ring. Alright, yapping and yammering is out of the way, let's play the actual game and get cracking on these quests. To do that, we've got to make a new room. If you'd like, you can set a password to stop randoms from joining. You see, this is meant to be a co-op game. They want you to party up with people. Again, because I've got no friends, it's just gonna be me. With our room made, we can select what map we want to play through. We can see them all, but obviously I can't play them all because they're tied to a certain level requirement and quest. We'll start off with the training camp, of course, and we can finally get to see how the game plays. Bots is a scrolling beat-em-up game. As you move across the map, enemies will spawn in, and you have to wipe them out to proceed further. You've got a basic attack that you can press multiple times to combo, a jump, and a block. Pretty simple, but there's a large amount of skill from those inputs alone, not even accounting for upgrades and power-ups we'll get later. I'm not going to pretend I've got the keenest eye or ability to explain the potential nuances the combat in this game brings, but I will give you the general vibes that I got playing. The enemies will use their numbers to swarm and overwhelm you. If you aren't careful, you'll get stun-locked and take heavy damage. So, you've got to play more strategically, kite their attacks and punish them during animations, charge in and smack them down before they can attack you, that kind of thing. I was surprised at how much the game offers in terms of approach when it comes to the combat, especially when you start getting abilities and different unlockables. Initially, I thought I could just run in and spam my attack button and be good to go, but due to the number of enemies in each area, even if you start doing that, one of them will be out of your range and will hit you out of your combo. Let's talk about those transformations I mentioned previously. Just below our health is a transformation bar that slowly fills up. Once it's full, you can activate your transformation. It doesn't happen instantly. There's a small meter you have to wait to fill up before you'll transform, and if you take any damage during this period, you'll get knocked out of the transformation sequence, which adds a nice layer of strategy to the ability. Once you do transform, you'll become a huge upgraded version of your bot, capable of moving faster and dealing substantially more damage. The transformations don't last long, and are meant to work as a trump card for the player to take out large swaths of enemies, or take down heavy hitting bosses. Playing around your transformation is a key part of the game, timing when you activate it and when the sequence finishes to ensure you're getting the most out of the ability. If you play safe and activate it too early, you might not use your time to its fullest potential, and run the risk of losing a fight because of it. Though if you're too greedy, you might get knocked out of the transformation sequence just before it activates. I really enjoy playing around the mechanic, and the game makes it fun to do so. The sound effects and animation, the payoff for timing a transformation correctly and taking down a boss that you might not have been able to beat without it, I love it a lot. Now, the actual map itself is pretty simple in layout. It's just a straight path with beginner enemies along it. I like the desert aesthetic it has going for it. They could have easily made the beginner area a generic sci-fi looking pathway, but they chose to add nice details and a unique design just to enrich the map. There were these barrels along the map that at the time I didn't realize I could break that would give me drops to use, but it's not a problem because they aren't necessary for the starter area. I do break them in later maps, and they generally contain trans refills, which fill up our transformation meter, or recharges, which are used if you have a gun equipped. More on that later. The starter map ends with us fighting our first boss. He's not hard at all, but you've got to be careful because he does have a small army of little bots around him that can overwhelm you. Once we beat him, we get a special item. There's a chance that'll happen after every boss encounter. Next up, we have the training ring, which aesthetic wise is definitely more generic. Instead of walking and fighting enemies along a path, we have to fend off waves of enemies that spawn inside this room. And surprisingly, I struggled with this even though it's only the second map of the game. There's way more nuance to the combat than you'd think. You actually gotta play around the enemies, your health, abilities and combos to come out victorious. I could only imagine what high level PvP looks like in this game. I almost feel like it could play out in a similar fashion to fighting games. Now, remember how at the start I said Surge has the potential to look the coolest? Well, let me show you what I meant. If we head to the shop, we can see every piece of customization available in the game. It's a bit confusing, but we'll get there. Each bot has 3 main points of customization: the head, the body, and the arms. As you level up and earn gigas, you can purchase different pieces of armor to upgrade your bot. Once you complete a full set, you get a matching transformation. So while the base set for Surge isn't the coolest, the later armor pieces look sick. Specifically the level 85 armor, Palladium. I'll be honest, this was the only game I actually used to play back in the day, and I was in love with this set and wanted it so bad. Something about the angular sharp aesthetic hits all the right notes for me. Each bot of course has their own sets of armor, and the game does a really good job of making them all feel distinct and different from one another. The only downside about this system is that if you're partial to a certain look for your bot, you'll have to eventually swap off it because it's not the optimal choice. The armor isn't just aesthetic, they boost your base stats, so continuously upgrading your armor is key to beating larger stages. Not that it's a requirement, of course. You could beat the maps with the starter armor, but you're putting yourself at a huge disadvantage doing so. But the customization doesn't stop there, as I'm sure you can tell from looking at this menu. There's coin heads, which all have the same stats but different aesthetics. These slot over regular head armor, so it won't affect your base stats. I'm not the biggest fan of these, mainly because they give your bot such a big head, but it's another layer of customization, which is always welcome. They're called coin heads because they generally only can be purchased with separate premium currency called coins. Because the game is free to play and doesn't have a membership system, the premium currency is its main way of earning revenue. Decently ahead of its time, actually. This was the system the base game had during its original release and matches how a lot of games handle microtransactions now. Keep in mind, ahead of its time isn't a good thing. I remember being so upset when I used to play this game because I didn't have any money to buy this sort of stuff. To give credit to this remake though, you can earn the heads from quests, events, or crafting sometimes. So you're not 100% locked out of them if you don't have any money. Besides that, you've got guns, which you saw me get from that first boss. Guns can be equipped by any bot, but do vary stat-wise depending on the bot you're using. For example, Surge has boosted ranged attack stats, meaning guns will do more damage. The base damage of the guns are the same, but how effective they are will vary depending on your bot choice. They've got a limited amount of uses per play session, with those aforementioned recharges reloading them. Just like the armor, the guns have increasing level requirements. The higher level the gun, the more base damage. And just like the armor, there's also a set of guns that you can only get through coins. Now, unlike the coin heads, which all have the same stats, the coin guns have varying stats. Now, I didn't mention it before, but these premium currency items can be seen as a bit pay to win, especially because they're usable in PvP. There's no level requirements for them, so if you made a new account and decided to splurge, you could come out with a level 1 bot that's doing damage way out of its league. Not too much of an issue in a PvE mode, a big issue in keeping a balanced PvP mode. Other customization include wings. These are locked behind coins, events, and quests. They're predominantly used to increase your bot's speed, and most of them have the same stats, just differing aesthetics. There's flags, which again just boost your base stats. These seemingly can only be purchased with coins. Probably the coolest thing about these is that the game has awarded flags for specific noteworthy players that only they own. I guess having such a small community, it makes sense to award those that are still investing time into it. You've also got shoulders and shields. These can be purchased with Gigas, so no spending money required. Just like the other earnable items, they have increased level requirements. The shoulders increase your health and transformation defense, and the shields increase your health and transformation gauge, meaning you can stay transformed for longer. There's also mini-bots. Majority of these are events, quests, or coin items. These are little robots that'll fight for you and provide different stat boosts and abilities. Some increase your luck so you get better drops, some increase your health, that kind of thing. And finally, when it comes to customization based on lockables, you've got different transformations. Besides your transformation changing depending on what armor you equip, you can also buy certain transformations that have their own unique abilities and aesthetic. These transformations work on any bot and look super cool based on their icons. Sadly, it's impossible for me to preview these. Hopefully, I can find some footage of people using them. Besides customization that changes your bot's aesthetic, there's also abilities you can both buy and earn. There's energy fields that do a plethora of different things, from increasing your base health to giving you a higher critical hit chance. And you've also got skill packs. These will give you new abilities you can use during battle. When I started the game, I was gifted a mystery box that gave me 2 of these, a charge attack and a counter attack. They have a limited amount of uses, 100 matches if earned or bought with Gigas, and 1,000 if purchased with coins. I'm glad the game gave me some, because they came super in handy later on. The counterattack skill is really useful when going up against bots with a higher damage output than mine, and the charge attack was great for taking out large groups of bots huddled together. I'll stop talking about the customization and abilities because there's a lot. Just know that there's even more that are specific to the PvP game modes. I really love that you can preview what items look like on your bot before you earn them. It's definitely a tactic to get you to buy the premium items, but it's still a feature I remember loving when I was younger. I would spend hours just moving through the menus and creating different sets of armor and weapons. I love bots, if you can't tell. I wish I had more to say about it, but it's not the kind of game with a story to look into in the same way as I did the other games. Though I will say, if you were to play any of the games I've mentioned in this video, this is the one, because it's the only game that's actually still functioning as intended and is still getting updated. And it's actually the only one I've kept playing after my initial session. Something about the game is addicting and enjoyable. It'll be linked in the description, as well as all the other featured games, so give it a play. I'm sure you won't regret it. I'm not done yet though. If you want to see me cover another MMO, you can become a channel member or Patreon for $1 a month. With every upload, I'll be doing an additional video, so if that interests you at all, please consider joining up. Special thanks to my King of Bones tier channel members Quiltman, Day, and Burf. Your support means the world. If you enjoyed watching, please consider subscribing and liking. I've got a Discord server now as well, so if you want to come have a chat, feel free to join. It'll be pinned in the comments. And with that being said, thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next upload.